Dame i gospodo, poštovani istraživači, dragi naši gosti, evo, imamo zadovoljstvo da, zahvaljujući trudnoljubivog rada naše poštovane dr. Dragane Brdić, imamo ovu sekciju koja treba da osvetli odnose s raznih centara, dakle, koji su u vremenu, koliko traje letopis Matice Srpske, a to je 2 puna veka, koji su, dakle, delovali na području Habsburškog carstva, Austrijske imperije, Austrijskog carstva i ostvarivali su kulturnu misiju koju je ostvarivao i letopis, a i Matica Srpska, kada je ona 2 godine kasnije osnovana. Zadovoljstvo je da vidimo kako to sve funkcioniše u različitim nacionalnim kulturama, odnosno kako je u Austrijskom carstvu, koje je bilo, kao što znamo, izuzetno nacionalno mešovito, kako su razne kulture funkcionisale u tom opštoj razmeni energije koja je postojala između nacionalnih kultura. Razume se, postojala ona dominantna nemačka kultura koja je obeležila sve i one pripadnike takozvanih malih naroda ili brojčano malih naroda, a eto prilika je da sada vidimo prosto kako je sve to funkcionisalo i kako se reflektovalo u nekim drugim kulturama, osim samo na nemačkom govornom području, kako se reflektovalo i na kulturama naroda kojima materni jezik nije bio nemački. To je razlog našeg okupljenja. Mi time činimo da se čitava ovaj komparativni ambijent u kojem je funkcionisao i letopis Matice Srpske i Matica Srpska kao ustanova, da se u ovim godinama kada obeležavamo 2 veka letopisa i 2 veka Matice Srpske, da se to osvetli na jedan potpuniji način, da istraživači stavljaju svoje vidno polje i da vidimo kakvi su rezultati koji govore o multikulturalnosti koja se na specifičan način ostvarivala i u onom vremenu, dakle, Habsburškog carstva, ali ono što je mnogo zanimljivije, kako danas, u današnjoj Evropi funkcioniše, dakle, multikulturalnost i koje su perspektive za njeno izvođenje. Danas je svakako neuporedivo bolja situacija, kao što Srbi na svojoj koži dobro su osjetili u 19. veku koliko je i u 18. i 19. veku koliko je bolja situacija u Habsburškom carstvu nego u Otomanskom carstvu. Dakle, mi kao kultura i narod imamo to osjećanje za upravo postojanje u specifičnom ambijentu tog tipa. Ako mi dozvolite, sad bih pozdravio naše drage goste. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you because you are here. We are really happy because you are in Matica Srpska, in Novi Sad, in Vojvodina, and in Serbia. We are together in order to give more lights on all these historical processes which are important for our national cultures in time when it was in Austrian Empire. There was a very specific ambience. For Serbs, it was much better than the Ottoman Empire. So we, as a nation, has much better conditions for development of civil society. And because of that, we have here Matica Srpska, we have letopis Matice Srpske, Matica Srpska Chronicle, as one of the oldest literary scientific journals with long duration, continuous duration. According to our knowledge, there was just one American literary journal which is comparable with letopis Matice Srpska. That was DL Review. It was founded in 1819 in New Haven, Connecticut. And I will, in my presentation, I will talk about that. And that as a phenomenon, but Letopis Matice Srpske was founded in 1824. And with some interruptions, it lasts up to our days. So that's the reason, because we decided that Matica Srpska is willing, or we are ready to be a place of meeting of all these old magazines from many different countries and cultural contexts to be here to talk about that phenomenon. So thanks for Dragan Grbić, because he was a really good spirit of this organization, and she collects us to talk about all these phenomena. Thank you, and I hope that you will enjoy your stay in Novi Sad, in our country, and I hope that we will prepare the text about what we are talking about today, and we will publish it in a book of texts about Letopis Matice Srpska and Matice Srpska. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Dr. Now we would like to open officially our hackathon dedicated to this topic, Matice Srpska and Letopis Matice Srpske in Comparative Perspective, Cultural Association of Austrian Empire and German language journals. And as you may see in this booklet, we have a program in the afternoon. We have scientific art, art section, and then in the after that, in the second part of our program, we will present two publications. So first of all, Professor Stanic will open the scientific part of our hackathon, and he will present Letopis Matice Srpske, Matica Srpska Chronicle, and the poetic challenges of German writers. As Professor Stanic already explained, we focused in this scientific section on journals and also cultural association within the Austrian Empire in one non-German speaking milieu. So our aim is actually to collect different impulses from different sites, not just Slavic but also Romanian and other minorities in the North. So now I would like to ask the president of Matica Srpska, Professor Dragan Stanic, to present his paper on Matica Srpska Chronicle and Poetical Challenges of German Writers.
Thank you. So I told you that I will talk about Letopis Matice Srpske as a periodical of long continuous duration, and I told you that it was founded in 1824. So our journal has a good experience in living in different political conditions, in different political and state context. So in Austrian Habsburg Empire, Letopis lived from 1824 up to 1914, and then that was interruption of his activity during the First War. In that period, there was two more interruptions. One was at 1835 and 1836, when Hungarian state tried to ban the work of Matica Srpska as institution. That was the first case. Another case was during the revolution of 48 and 49. So the third interruption, the fourth interruption was during the Second War. So you can conclude that the only reason when Letopis Matice Srpske didn't print it, was in life, was outside of Matica srpska and outside of Matica srpska, of letopis Matica srpska. After Austrian-Habsburgian Empire, between two world wars, letopis and Matica srpska were in the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovens, and Kingdom of Yugoslavia. That was just the change of name. After the Second War, there was a socialist, communist Yugoslavia with different names, and I don't want to bother you about the names, but it was ended in 1991. After that, there was Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, Republic of Serbia and Montenegro, and since 2006 there was the Republic of Serbia. So different states, different ideology, context, different law system, whatever. A lot of changes. And this experience of different historical situations, I think, is very important for Matica srpska and for letopis Matica srpske. We have in our institution and in the letopis, we have some kind of traditional orientation, but with a deep understanding of historical processes. So we are not going further new events in the history, but we are just expecting and waiting for the moment when it is necessary to develop a new ambience in a field of creation in different fields. Matica srpska concerns with literature, but many different science, and this is the experience of our institution. It was an interesting situation that letopis Matica srpske at the very beginning was editing in Novi Sad here, and the founder was professor of our gymnasium. That was the second gymnasium in Serbian culture here in Novi Sad. The first one was in Sremski Karlovci. And, the first one was founded in 1791. And the second gymnasium was here in Novi Sad in 1810. So there was a good collection, let us say, of interesting people. There was Professor Georgije Magarašević, who was the founder of the magazine. And, for example, there was a very important figure in the field of slavistics, that was Pavel Josef Šafarik. He was Slovak one, but he was here director and professor in our gymnasium. And at that time, editing was in Novi Sad, but printing was in Buda. Then there was a period where both of it was in past. Then in one short period was that editing was in Vienna. Editor-in-chief at that time, Jovan Subotić, lived in that period in Vienna, and it was printing in Buda. And after coming Matica srpska here in Novi Sad in 1864, it became just a place where it was letopis Matica srpske was editing and printing in Novi Sad. Just in a short period there was a situation where it was some editors-in-chief lived in Sremski Karlovci, or it was a situation where we printed our literary magazine also in Sremski Karlovci, but a very short period. So this is a situation that letopis has that experience of different towns with different situations in different cultures, like German-speaking culture or Hungarian-speaking culture, and that was the, let us say, charm of Habsburgian Empire. So, if we compare the situation with other cultures, I put in my field of interest American magazines, because we found two journals which were very, very old. The one I mentioned you was the Yale Review. The other one was the North American Review, which is the older than the Yale Review. The second one was founded in 1814, but it has a big problem, because it was has a great gap, because he ended his life at the beginning of the Second War, and there was just a terrible story about it, because editor-in-chief was accused for kind of spy activity in Japanese, and engaged for that activity, and that literary magazine was without any life up to the middle of 60s, more than 25 years. So he's alive right now. He was very good before the Second War. He's very well right now. Very often he mentioned as best edit right now, and last a few decades he very often was mentioned as a very good American, or also he has some awards as a best editing American literary magazine. So it's important right now, but he has that interruption in his activity, and the reasons were in itself, not outside of it. So I was trying to figure out what are, let us say, important moments or details or crucial parts of activity of the literary magazine in order to be long, continuous periodical with a long, continuous duration. And my conclusion, first of all, is that for that literary magazine, literary scientific magazine, because all of this are literary scientific magazine, and we are talking about that type of genre, you know, we are not talking about just scientific genre, because scientific journals, you have a lot of them in academies, many different, especially in France, but the situation with that literary scientific journals is very interesting for us. And conclusion, first conclusion is that it's really necessary to have a good protector. Because North American Review has no good protector. That was private activity. And that private guy, you know, he just was thinking about his profit. And why not? Japanese give him money. Okay, I'll do that. Why not? But if you have a good institution like as a protector, so it's much better. The Yale Review has a good protector. First, in a shorter period, that was University of from Baltimore, Johns Hopkins, and after that, the Yale University became, and up to now, this is who cares about magazine. And duration and continuity in publishing of this literary scientific magazine is the most impressive in the world. They have just 1 year, and it was 1990. And I was looking just what was the reason, you know, in 20th century to interrupt for 1 year. It's a strange thing, but there was just some very private relationships between some people on the top of the magazine. So the protector is the most important. Then skill editors are the most important because, you know, it's not necessary to explain why it is necessary, but skill editors, honest editors, editors who knows very much about literature and about science, that was really necessary. And when we look at the history of Letopis Matice Srpske, we can conclude he was the really editor-in-chief with a great role, who is not so good as some of them. According to my knowledge, Georgij Magarašević, the first one was great one, then Teodor Pavlović, for example, then Jovan Subotić, then Milan Savić, Tihomir Ostojić, etc. But we can say that, for example, 10 or maybe more than 10, there was really impressive phases of that history. There was no one politics, there was no one value, but different periods of history of our journal. So it's really necessary to get the help of valuable authors and collaborators, and that's the main task for editor-in-chiefs. To achieve a successful understanding of different types of poetics, generational and cultural codes, it's very important for such type of literary scientific magazine. And I can tell you that all of these magazines with a long duration has a nature which can be described as a kind of review. Because a literary scientific magazine with a long duration cannot be, you know, a place for such coterias or such poetical groups or just one generation. No, it's necessary to be just traditional in a good way of that word. Traditional in the that meaning what, for example, T.S. Eliot has in mind when he wrote his important essay, Traditional Individual Talent. For magazine, it's very important how to solve that problem, to take into journal all these individual talents and innovations, individual innovations, and to transform from one epoch or period of history of literature or history of culture in next one. And we have a lot of, that's a great pleasure for investigators to see a lot of levels in the history of journals. So this is some kind of conclusion of general poetics, let us say, of such literary scientific magazine. And I want to just in a few words tell you what is about the presence of German writers in Letopis Matice Srpske. So let us say from the very beginning. At the very beginning of our Letopis, there was two traditions. The most important was antique tradition. That was the time of the beginning of 19th century, the influence of antique poetics were very important for whole schools, for our gymnasium in Karlovci, here also in Novi Sad, and so that was educational system in whole Europe at that time was as such. So translations from Old Greek or Latin was really important for Serbian literature of that period. But German writers were the most important tradition of that literatures in modern European languages. So I can just tell you some writers which were the most influential, because we can observe that there was much more translations from opus of these writers than from the others. First author who was very interesting for Serbian writers, for Georgija Magarašević, was Solomon Gesner. His idylls were very popular in that time, and that was, let us say, a popularity in whole Europe. And we have a situation in where almost in every year, because Magarašević was editor-in-chief 6 years, and almost every year we have Gesner's idylls. So he found that it's, as man of Enlightenment, Magarašević thought that it's important for Serbian literature, you know, to develop that genre of idyll, especially that form of Gesner's idyll, which was in prose writing, not in poetic lines. Then another poet, and he was really the most influential in many decades, was Friedrich Schiller. I have here all the facts about his translations. What is important, there was several translators who did it. In this case of Gesner, there was just one translator, Jovan Hadžić, and just one editor-in-chief who published Gesner. But Friedrich Schiller, he was in a long period of several decades, he was an object of that type of activity. Then Goethe was, of course, very popular, but that was good for me, a very interesting fact for me to observe that Friedrich Schiller was much more, in the first period, was interested for our cultural situation. There was some others which were just occasion. For example, Birger, just one translation. There was also other people with I don't want to bother you with the facts, but my conclusion is next. Translations of poetic texts from ancient and German, from antique literature and the German literature represented the main source of poetic insights through which Serbian poets of the first half of the 19th century were able to perceive the poetic perspectives not only of antique and also in German poetics, but also the paths of their own poetic development. That was the reason, because they are interested, you know, in big figures from German literature. Therefore, the choice of translated poets was largely very deliberate and aimed at achieving certain historical poetic effects. The most significant translators of poetic texts from German in the Chronicle and the Letopis Matice Srpske were Jovan Hadžić, Vladislav Stojadinović Čikoš, Vasilije Subotić, Teodor Pavlović, Petar Teodosijević, Jovan Ivanović Zmaj. All of them were translators of Friedrich Schiller's poems. The choice of translated writers was not at all accidental and was most often calculated to achieve certain respective effects within Serbian literature. Gessner's translation was intended, for example, to promote and popularize the idyll as a genre, and an idyll written in rhythmic prose. August Gottlieb Meissner translations was intended to promote and popularize primarily the fable as a genre, and to a lesser extent the epigram. And the reference of the poetry of Martin Opitz, he was very popular in Serbian literature at that time, Baroque German writer. The poetry of Martin Opitz was intended to be a valid guide for emphasizing the importance of accent in the metrical organization of verse, because that was the big role of Martin Opitz in German literature. And to experience the German Baroque poetry was with such poetic experiencedness in Serbian poetry. The reference to the poetry of Friedrich Schiller, we have a great study of Pero Slijepčević, Schiller in Yugoslavia, and that was influence of Schiller in different Yugoslavian national poetries. Pero Slijepčević described very well. And then Johann Wolfgang Goethe, in the first half of the 19th century, was intended to point to the highest poetic value-based and aesthetic standard that German literature more than successfully achieved in the Sturm and Drang epoch. With all these very encouraging and significant translation results, the first major wave of translation of poets from the German language was achieved in the Chronicle. I would just to mention you some things that the story about the influence of Goethe was increasingly and it was going higher up. So when it was the 100th year of the death of Goethe, Letopis Matice Srpske published almost whole thematic issue devoted to Goethe, and that was the only case in the history up to our days when it was whole issue was dedicated to any other foreign culture and foreign literature, and especially one person. And we have just one example with from 208 when we have published one thematic issue devoted to German-speaking literature and the relationship between Serbian and German culture. There was writers like Peter Hanke, Ransmayr, Uwe Kolbe, etc. So I have all names here. I was the editor-in-chief in that period when we published this one. So the case of, and that's the end of my presentation, sorry because of long duration of my presentation, but this is the tradition of Letopis Matice Srpske. So Petar Handke was a special case for Serbian literature. His popularity became even in 80s, and Žarko Radaković was the most prominent, he's a translator in Serbia. There are several others also, but Žarko Radaković was
from Köln.
Yeah, from Köln, yes. And we have chosen 8 years ago. We have chosen Petar Handke as a member, honorary member of Matica Srpska. And we published this book about Serbian writers wrote about his literary work. There was also some poets who were poems about Hanke, etc. So that was a kind of how we can describe our relationship to one important value from German-speaking literature. So sorry, because of long duration speech.
Thank you, Professor Stanic, for your presentation and these very important insights. And as you may see from this presentation, when we were discussing the concept of this table ronde, our thoughts were, should we profile it as a German-Serbian connections or German-speaking area, and let this Matica srpske and Matica srpska as such. And our decision was to profile this table ronde in the wider German-speaking area, including actually the Habsburg monarchy, the Austrian Empire, and of course not just Austrian and German, Prussian, but also Swiss orders. So now I would like to say, before I start my presentation, I would just like to say a few words about the concept of our table ronde. And before all, this is really the great honor and the highest pleasure for me that we gather here today on this special occasion celebrating this very important jubilee for Matica srpska, 200 years from the founding of the institution, and also 200 years of founding Letopis Matica srpske. And my deepest gratitude gets toward Professor Stanic and Matica srpska, but also to Professor Heppner and to Society for 18th Century Studies on Southeastern Europe from Graz, and also to dear participants of this table ronde who accepted our invitation to be here today and to present our research work. So the aim of this table ronde is actually to give an overview of all different minority cultures back then in the Austrian Empire within the German-speaking area as a dominant cultural policy. And here we will have presentations with our dear guests from Austria, from Slovenia, and from Romania, 3 case studies that will support our hypothesis about this different kind of exchange that existed back then in the Austrian Empire. So we will publish the results of our research work bilingually. The first part will be published here, as Professor Stanic already said in the introduction that he provided in Serbian language. So we will publish our research work bilingually. The first part will be published here in Serbian language within the collection of essays that will be edited here in Matica srpska. And then the second part of our research work we will publish in a bit of broader context that I will edit for the Society of 18th Century Studies in Southeastern Europe, supported by my dear colleagues from the Society, and we will try to connect Matica srpska and different kind of cultural institutions within the Austrian Empire and the Ottoman Empire during the 19th century. So we are planning actually this book for the 2027. So I will just say a few organizational things. We have now the first part, and after my presentation, Professor Heppner will give an introduction to this broader milieu, and after that we will have a short coffee break, and after that, before we conclude the first session, we will have a short discussion. So we agreed to have discussions not after each paper, but at the end of each session. And in the second part, Professor Peternel and Professor Stanjo Paskarica will present their papers, and in the second part we will also have a discussion. So feel free to ask everything if you would like to discuss something with us in details. So to speak about Matica srpska, and Letopis Matice Srpske Matice Chronicle on this occasion of celebrating huge anniversaries such as 200 years of the foundation is very great honor, of course, but at the same time a huge responsibility, but also a huge challenge. Because I defined my topic, the creation of Matica srpska and Letopis Matice Srpske from the spirit of the Enlightenment at the end of the Age of Reason. So connecting actually the Enlightenment, Matica srpska and Chronicle, Matica srpska Chronicle with the epoch of the Enlightenment is something that is not new. It is written about many times, and that's why I said it is a huge challenge not to repeat the facts that are already stated in the foundation of Matica Srpska, in the peer review of the institution, and that's why by preparing my presentation, I have been thinking what should be the concept of the Enlightenment connected with Matica Srpska in order not to repeat something that is already being said. And in this kind of sense, my thoughts were that the keyword, if we should choose just one keyword that is connecting the Age of Reason, the Enlightenment, the West European context, the Matica Srpska and the journal, in my opinion, the common denominator would be the learned society. So just to sum up, the story about Matica Srpska, its journal, and the Age of Reason is actually the story about the learned society and its journal. So what this kind of concept telling us for this special within this special occasion. So the story of founding of Matica Srpska and the launch of the Letopis is a bit different from this concept, as Professor Stanic already said, in the sense that in West European context, usually the institution was found as a first, and then they launched the journal. In our case, the process was a bit reversed, because the Letopis, the journal, was launched at first 824, and after that, in order to support the journal, not to actually to support financial continuity to the journal, the institution of Matica Srpska was found. In this kind of sense, learned society supported journal and not vice versa. But if you would like to sum up what was the role of the learned society within the Age of Reason, we can put some in my opinion, four most important concepts. The first and the most important one was the institutionalization of science. Before that, during the 15th, the 16th century, science wasn't institutional, wasn't supported through institutions if we neglect universities. Now we are not speaking about universities or monasteries, but we are speaking about individual efforts within the science. Before that, science became an organized activity, not just the work of individuals. Then the second point was standardization of knowledge, because rules for publishing and reviewing papers being to develop, and if you would like to connect this aspect with our age, this is something like the very beginning of the peer review process. So the role of the learning society played the role that we have today with peer reviewers. Then the third very important point was international exchange of ideas, not just within the society, but also from different countries through the dissemination of knowledge being presented in journals, because individuals, very learned and very well educated individuals, could read each other's works. And we also had this as an example within Matica among Slavic populations in the monarchy, but also, as Professor Stanic listed, not just Slavic population, but also German-speaking authors were represented here. And then the last but not least, a spread of the Enlightenment ideas, because ideas about reason, progress in the first place, and critical thinking spread faster than before due to the democratization of knowledge and the usage of the mother tongue. So the vernacular language was also very important for learned societies. So periodicals actually allowed intellectuals to reach a wider audience, not just within one very concrete sphere, and journals and periodicals fostered actually public discussion, encouraged critical thinking beyond the confines of universities and monasteries. And that was the privilege of learned societies to go out from this sphere of universities. So if we would like to position the Matica srpska and the journal of Matica srpska within the broader context, I will just sketch the West European part for the age of reason, and I listed English, French, and German learned societies. So this is very well known that the first learned society was founded in Great Britain. That was the Royal Society in the second part of the 17th century. And after that, the Society for Encouragement of Arts, Manufactures and Commerce was founded almost 100 years after that. And then on the right side, we have journals, but I would just like to point out, these are not journals edited or published on the side of the learned societies, but these are journals that were actually run or edited by some of members of the learned society. So this is not the case that we have here in Matica srpska, that one institution has its journal, but this is actually more like intertwining of intellectual interests. So the most popular one was, of course, The Spectator, but it was very short-lived. It continued only 1 year, but it was published daily and had a very broad audience. Then the most important one, it lasted almost 200 years, 191, was the Gentleman's Magazine that published also literary works and literary critique. And we also have the Monthly Review, that was the journal and the magazine that promoted the discourse of the Enlightenment. If we switch to French, Milieu, we have Académie de Sciences, founded in 1066, and this is the mistake, so it's not 19th century but 17th century, my apology for this. And then Société de Sciences de Lettres was founded 100 years after that. It was provide like a society, like a literary club. And of course we have prominent examples in the French speaking area about the journals, but not just journals, but institutions that collected knowledge. This is of course the project of Columbia and Encyclopedia, not just like a journal, as I said, but a project. And the most important journals connected with the famous representatives from the French learned societies were Journal de Salon and Mercure de France. This Mercure de France lasted 153 years, and it was, the discontinuation was only during the Napoleon Wars. Both journals were profiled with literary content and also published different kinds of scientific essays. And then we have several examples from German, mostly Prussian state. The first German learned society, if you would like to say, was Leopoldina, Academia Leopoldina, founded in Halle an der Saale, 1652, and after that, at the very beginning of the Age of Reason, was the Prussian Preußische Akademie der Wissenschaften, and in the middle of the 18th century, Société der Wissenschaften zu Göttingen was founded, and for our milieu, it is important to say that our Athanasius Stojkovic, who studied in Göttingen, also was a member of this society. If you would like to draw the parallel about journals who were somehow connected with these kind of societies, maybe the most, not the most important one, but very prominent one, was Allgemeine Deutsche Bibliothek, that lasted only 40 years during the 18th century. Then the Neue Deutsche Merkur, that was edited but by very prominent German author Martin Wieland, was also connected with the French model of the journal, and then the most important one for us, for Slavic-speaking cultures, was Allgemeine Literaturzeitung, founded in Jena and also in Leipzig. And for us, this magazine was important because already at the very end of the 18th century, so during the Age of Reason, Allgemeine Literaturzeitung published reviews about the Slavic literature. For example, some essays, not essays, but critiques of Tosipa Obradovic's work, Vuk Karadžic's Reform, Jovan Rajić's History, Emanuel Jankovic's dramas were published in Allgemeine Literaturzeitung. And why is this important for us? Because in this kind of sense, that was for the very first time that western part of Europe was acquainted with Slavic-speaking literatures from this part of Europe, southeastern part of Europe. So these were somehow connected journals or magazines with the learned societies, and in order to make a parallel with the journal of Matica Srpska Chronicle, I was searching for journals with a bit longer tradition, for example 100 years, 150 years or so, and I found several examples. So the longest running German magazines, maybe the most prominent example is Gotha Almanach, published in Gotha, in eastern part of Germany, and that was the almanac that was dedicated to publishing only genealogical essays about ruling dynasties. So it wasn't the type of journal as it is, for example, Allgemeine Literaturzeitung or Deutsche Merkur or something like this. That was actually a kind of a royal almanac dedicated to royal dynasties. Then we have one scientific journal, Astronomische Nachrichten, and it is still lasting. So we have here tradition over 200 years, and as Professor Stanitz says, of course we can find scientific journals that are long-lived, but the profile that is closely connected, like letopis, Matica Srpska Chronicle, is very rare to find. And then we have the third example, das ist die Neue Rundschau. That was also a German magazine founded at the end of the 19th century with the tradition. It is still published. It still runs. And the tradition was, the concept was dedicated mostly to literary critiques and philosophical essays. So if you would like to broaden the horizon, we will have then the longest running magazines in German language, including the Austrian Empire or Austria and the Switzerland. So the most prominent one with the longest tradition in German-speaking area is Neue Zürcher Zeitung, founded in 1780 in Zurich, and the tradition it still runs, and it is 250 years, 46 years of tradition. But the genre of these periodicals is newspaper. So in this kind of sense, this is different from our letopis. And then we have the Austrian example, Die Presse, founded in this revolutionary year, 1848, with a little bit longer tradition, over 178 years. And as we may see, both Neue Zürcher Zeitung and Die Presse, these are newspapers, not magazines. So the parameters for our comparison, if you would like to compare letopis, Matica Srpske, and all the journals and magazines that I mentioned, so three parameters were important for me. The first criteria was the literary and cultural and scientific profile of the journal, then continuous publication up to the present day, so continuously publishing, and a direct connection to a learned and cultural institution such as Matica Srpska. So, and here we have, for example, the first year of launching, 824, and this is the foundation act of Matica Srpska. It's not possible to see also, but this is 826. So if we combine both years together, so we cannot find any kind of parallel case or similar cases in German-speaking area, as far as I know. Maybe I would be very grateful if someone could correct me, but during my research work I wasn't able to find any journals according to these parameters that could be compared to a letopis in Matica srpska. So if we are speaking about Matica srpska, we have here 824 and 826, so we are at the very beginning of the Romanticism in this eastern part of Europe. So we can ask a question, how we dare to speak about the Enlightenment at the beginning of the Romanticism, and actually the another question is, how long was the long 18th century in the Balkans? So this kind of shifted periodization in southeastern Europe is an issue, I would like to say, and probably we will hear something about this later on from Professor Hefner, when he will speak about his book, Die Neuzeit mit Verspätung. But this kind of shifted periodization, like switching from one period to another, is something that is very typical for eastern part of Europe. But we will go back to the term of the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment as such, as a term, we are able to find in the very first published document of Matica srpska, and this is Osnov, the foundation. And then Osnov, or the foundation, already in the very first chapter, we are able to read that the Enlightenment mission was the main mission of the newly founded institution, and it is clearly emphasized already in the first paragraph. So the opening section bears the subtitle Povodi namerenje, so reason and the intention, and states the reason for founding the society is solely a love and zeal for the common good, while its intention is that Serbian manuscript books be brought to light and disseminated throughout the world, now and henceforth, without interruption and forever. When we are reading this kind of statement in the very first document published in Matica, this is really amazing to see what kind of ambition they had. Because in the very first sentence they are saying without interruption and forever, connecting this with the dissemination of knowledge and the Enlightenment. In our context, speaking about the launching Slavic institution and Slavic journal within the Habsburg milieu of German as official language, it's important to stress this political context of this institution, and we also have this here in the second paragraph, because the founders of the journal and the Matica, they actually used the document that was issued by the Austrian Tsar Franz I from 826, and they are quoting here what the Tsar actually said that is to be done for all other minorities in the Habsburg monarchy. And we have here the quotation, our most illustrious and benevolent monarch, Francis I, wishing to enlighten, also here is the original, da se prosvešćenja narodnoga radi, also the Enlightenment as such is here quoted, wishing to enlighten, to educate, and to make happy all his faithful subjects, has also extended his gracious attention to Serbian people, and so on and so on. And then further we can read, the most powerful means by which abundant rays of the Enlightenment are spread among the people, so this is here. And then at the same time, his keen eye observed the zeal and effort are wasted, and so on and so on. And this document was issued in 812. So almost 15 years before launching the Journal of Matica srpska and Matica srpska institution. And then we have the quotation from this document, that for the sake of the enlightenment of the people, a fund should be established among the Serbian nation from which books by worthy authors might be printed and profitably distributed. So the Tsar wasn't speaking about the institution, about Matica srpska as such, but he spoke about the fund. And then the Serbian people gathered in the Habsburg monarchy understood this as a chance to found the institution. So if we add to this kind of programmatic concept, connecting closely with the Enlightenment, the list of authors published in letopis, and at the same time the list of contributors of letopis. On the right, on the left side, we can see name of authors whose works were either translated or published in original in Matica srpska, and I marked here in colors. For example, white are Serbian authors, then we have a representative of Slavic cultures, because this is connected with Objavljeni from 824, to collect knowledge about all Slavic peoples. So it was closely connected. Enlightenment was intertwining with the pan-Slavic movement back then, and that's why they were not oriented just to Serbian people but to whole Slavic milieu. So to collect knowledge about all Slavic peoples, we can see here clearly. So we have the blue Russian authors, Dobrovsky, Janko, Ludovic Tua, Slovakian authors, then we have Czech, then we also have Hungarian authors who wrote in Serbian and in Hungarian. Then, of course, we have representative of French Enlightenment, for example, Voltaire. And then the biggest group, as Professor Steinitz already said in his presentation, was dedicated to German authors. I forgot to say, to mention this, but the corpus of my research work was based only on the first decade of launching letopis Matica srpske. So I didn't research the whole corpus of the journal. I focused from the 824 to 836. So in the very first decade, we are able to see this kind of concept. But if we analyze authors who collaborated with the journal, either as editors or just authors of some journals, we can, or of some essays, we can see that the majority, of course, were Serbian people. But we also have several representatives of Slovak language, Jan Kolar, Pavel Josef Šafarik, and Ludovic Tua, very prominent representatives of the Pan-Slavic movement, and one protagonist from Polish culture, so Andrzej Kucharski, so they were collaborators. If we would like to sum up what this kind of list is telling us, this is actually resembling three major issues published in Objavljeni by launching the magazine. So what was the main aim of the journal? To collect knowledge about all Slavic people, so we have it here. To collect knowledge about all European peoples, we have here presented through the concept and the choice of the literature, and to collect the cultural and natural treasure. And it brings us to the last part of my presentation. Actually, this list of collaborators from the left and from the right side reveals one very important fact, and if you would like to choose one common denominating word for all those authors, this is the vernacular language, so the mother tongue. All of them wrote and published in vernacular language, and this is the common denominator also for the age of the Enlightenment. So if you would like to transfer this kind of concept to the typology of the Enlightenment, what kind of the Enlightenment it was, it would be, in my opinion, something that we are calling Volksaufklärung, so popular enlightenment. So it wasn't the enlightenment of the highest level, like the mature enlightenment represented in France by Voltaire or by Kant and Mendelssohn in Germany, but we can see here, we have here representatives of the highest enlightenment from the West European sphere. Mendelssohn is here, Voltaire is here, La Rochefoucauld is here. So we have representatives of the highest enlightenment, so to say, but they were presented in another concept, in the concept of the enlightenment for the common people. And speaking of Matica srpska, this kind of the policy of the institution was connected not only with the journal, but also with a special edition, and it is Knjiga za narod. So it means a special edition was launched a little bit later, so books for the people. And with this edition, collaborators and contributors of letopis also prepared certain essays and works, not from literary milieu, but also from other spheres for common people. And I will close my presentation. Speaking of Enlightenment, we cannot omit the Holy Trinity of Serbian Enlightenment, and these are, of course, Dositej Obradović, Jovan Gajić, and Zaharija Orfelin. And I will just try to show you how the letopis Matice Srpske actually resembles the concept of the Enlightenment of the 18th century. So we are all familiar with the fact the very beginning of the Serbian periodicals started with the Orfelin Slaveno-Serbski magazine, 1768, and if we are reading the period, introductory part of this magazine, we can find some statements that are completely identical with letopis Matice Srpska and Okrugli. And the second periodical created by Zaharija Orfelin in 1783 was the Eternal Calendar, and I will just try to illustrate the concept of the first Serbian periodicals, in this case Večni Kalendar, the Eternal Calendar, and letopis Matice Srpske, because letopis it means a chronicle, in a way this is a calendar. So if we compare the structure of periodicals, we can see the following structure. Večni Kalendar starts with a Menologion, Menaion, so this is actually the calendar about the saints, and we have the same structure here in letopis. The only difference is the position. Letopis opens the calendar, and Orfelin's Svjetoslav is after the introduction. After that, the second part, the second section in the first issue of letopis Matice Srpske is Naznačenje, and it is actually introduction about the European rulers, religion, population, and so on. The same elements we are finding in Orfelin's calendar, but at the end of the book. Then another alignment is, for example, the presentation of Serbian and Slavic rulers. In letopis, we have two essays. One is dedicated to so to say, the concept of identity, Vidovdan and Kosovo, so medieval history. And then we have, right after that, the next chapter is about the whole Slavic milieu, about the history of Slavic people. And in Orfelin's calendar, we are finding also, but in somehow summarized varieties, also the history of medieval time and the rulers. And if we are speaking about this kind of listing, we can find the connections with Gotaja Almanach that I mentioned in the first part of my presentation. So we can see that the calendar, Orfelin's calendar, and also letopis are resembling actually West European models. And then there is also a section dedicated to religion and the clergy in letopis, and in Eternal Calendar we are also able to find parallels about this. And the fifth chapter is dedicated to education. In letopis we have a list of universities in all countries where Serbs were studying, and in the Eternal Calendar we have a list with newly founded institutions in Western Europe. So the most important thing, if we are speaking about the Enlightenment and letopis, is the fact that letopis tended to preserve natural cultural heritage and everything that was connected with the representatives of the Enlightenment, and that was epistles, so letters. We have letters of very prominent representatives of the Enlightenment, Dositej Obradović, Pavle Solarić, Grigorije Trlajić, and so on. These are presented in letopis in the first decade. Statistically speaking, this is more than 100 letters being published there. And it is not just a coincidence bringing it in connection letters with the journal, because letters was the form of correspondence among the intellectuals within the learned societies before they launched magazines. So before learned societies in the western part of Europe had journals, they used letters to correspond and to discuss these kind of topics, and that's why this is not a coincidence that we have letters as the most presented genre in letopis Matice Srpske. And let me conclude my presentation connecting the anniversary of Matica Srpska and letopis Matice Srpske with two prominent representatives of the Enlightenment. These are Zaharia Felin, that was born in 1726, and Jovan Vajnić, born in the same age, 1726, when Matica Srpska was founded. And in a way, my presentation is an homage, a dedication to this milieu of the Enlightenment in our culture. So I just showed the connections between Dositej Obradović and letopis Matice Srpske and Zaharia Felin and letopis Matice Srpske. And if you would like to place Jovan Vajnić within this concept, we can find the connections that Jovan Vajnić was directly connected with Matice Srpska through his stepson Petar Rajić. Petar Rajić was born in Kovačica, and he was, his father died when he was a young boy because he took part in the Turkish war, and then his mother moved from Kovačica to Prvi. This is the place close to Novi Sad, where at that time Jovan Vajnić was an archimandrite in this monastery. And we all know who Jovan Vajnić was and what he did for our culture, but also several years before his death, he made an agreement, Jovan Vajnić made an agreement with Mojsej Putnik, and he sold him all his manuscripts and put it on the disposal to the Metropolitan of Karlovci, and he also got a certain amount of money for these manuscripts, and he also received several awards for his history. So he wasn't a very rich monk, but he had a certain amount of money. For us, for our case, it's important to say that the most of this amount of money, 4,000 florins, Jovan Vajnić presented as a gift to his stepson Petar Rajić, who was one of the founders of Matica Srpska. So if you would like to make a parallel with our age today, the amount of 4,000 florins back then, at the beginning of the 19th century, when Jovan Vajnić wrote his will, that was approximately like the several decades of salary of very prominent intellectuals, and this amount of money was enough to start a business. What Petar Rajić actually did, he started commerce in Budapest and also to buy a house in Pest that wasn't very cheap back then. So this is actually comparable to hundreds of thousands of euros today. So this amount of money that Jovan Vajnić, whose anniversary we are also celebrating in this year, gave to his son, is in a way symbolically built in the foundation of Matica Srpska. And let me conclude my presentation with this homage to Jovan Vajnić and Zaharia Felin, the most important representatives of the Enlightenment that are somehow connected with German and Matica. Now we will have the third presentation, and I have a great honor to invite Professor Hetna to present his presentation. Professor Hetna will speak Professor Hetna here among us today. It is not the very first time that Professor Hetna is here in Serbia or in Novi Sad. He collaborated several times with our prominent and dear colleagues here from the University of Matica, and he also edited a collection of essays together with Professor Asim and Nenad Nikovic. But Professor Hefner is coming from the University of Graz, where he taught history of South and Eastern Europe, and Professor Hefner was the president of the Society of 18th Century Studies of Southeastern Europe. Professor Hefner was engaged in different kinds of projects dealing with this kind of cultural history, and he is author of several monographs. For example, das Russland in der öffentlichen Meinung Österreichs, then Österreich und die Donaufüße Trümmer, Alltag am Balkan vom 14. bis 16. Jahrhundert und Reisen und die Geschichte verstehen. Und das letzte Buch, the last book that we will also present today, this is die Neuzeit und Verspätung. Professor Hefner also was editor in several, not just several, but more than 20 collection of essays. As I already mentioned, he collaborated with our colleagues from Serbia and edited not just a collection of essays, but also thematic issues in the magazines. And today, Professor will present her paper on mediation of culture for the people.
So, thank you very much for the presentation and the invitation and so on. My approach to the subject is a little bit different from the other two presentations. I would like to speak first some remarks about the characteristics of the period, then some case studies on Syria, Perugia, Salzburg, and Chapa, Austria as selected case studies in the Alpine area of the Habsburg monarchy, and some remarks about the protagonists and the cultural topics, and then finalize with the effects and the conclusion. The presentations refers to the period about 1800 and 1900, when major upheavals took place in the Habsburg monarchy. The most important only ones for the present context are the following three. A central role was played by defense against external threats. Based on the era of Napoleonic wars, which on the one hand opened the door to new political perspectives, but which also involved a great deal of violence, arbitrariness, material hardship, and uncertainty, and stimulated patriotism. We have to note that in this area, not only in this area, but in these case studies, the French army entered and managed a very hard occupation system, and therefore it was a shock for the population, and so they looked for an alternative, or a mental alternative. Given the federal structure in German-speaking Habsburg lands, resisting influence from above was also part of television. The more modernizing impulses came from the Viennese government, the greater regional interest grew in creating a counterbalance, not only in institutions, but also in terms of mental reason. And therefore I will give you a historic background for this long tradition of federalism concerning these four case studies. And finally, defense from below also played an increasingly important role. It was not yet about seeking a national unity of all speakers of the same language, but about giving power and influence to the social class that shaped the era the most, the bourgeoisie, as opposed to the nobility on the one hand and the mainly rural classes on the other. Let me come to the first example. Here you can see that with the red flash where I come from. The Duchy of Styria existed since the 12th century. It was the first region to have merged with what was then referred to as Austria. The administration of the country was in the hands of the so-called estates, which were made up of 3 curiae till the middle of the 19th century. The nobility were representatives of the Catholic clergy and the city citizens. 2/3 of the country were inhabited by people of the German-speaking group, while 1/3 of the population in the south today is a part of Slovenia, mostly belonged to the Slovene-speaking group. Styria had as neighbor in the east Hungary, in the south Croatia. Since 1585 there has been a university in Graz, which was run by the Catholic Jesuit congregation until the 1770s. The students came not only from the region itself, but also from neighboring countries, from the Adriatic coast to the Western Carpathians. They had urban as well as rural backgrounds. And now I will show you a scheme. A museum and the archives, the regional museum and the regional archives as main steps for the mediation of culture was founded 1811 and sometimes certainly adapted and for modernized status. Instead of the association and the yearbook, it had not the title yearbook, but more or less was a function of the yearbook, was founded only after the revolution of 1848 and 9. Then the situation changed concerning the different crown lands. So we can see that as immediate reaction on the, I would say, on the French crash in the country, that as the regional initiative started to collect materials concerning the region and a new order concerning the archives, etc. You can see then that there are key differences between the 4 case studies. The next country is Carinthia in the west of Styria. The Duchy of Carinthia had existed since 976, making it roughly 2 centuries older than Styria. The provincial leadership in Carinthia consisted of the same components as in Styria, but the Slovene-speaking population in the southern part of the country was proportionally larger than in Styria. The neighboring territories in the southwest was the Venetian province, so-called Italy. In the south, the Duchy of Caniola, the core zone of the Slovenian people. These lands did not have any university till the middle of the 20th century. But now, the first and still existing journal, yearbook, whatever, is the Corinthian, beginning with 1811. And was in the first step edition part for a magazine, and afterwards moved to independent publication and got a more or less scientific character till today, but it was a long way. And the association behind this initiative for interested people to mediate the culture to the larger public was in the same year than the foundation of the museum, 1844, instead of the archives, which were organized only at the beginning of the 20th century. The third example concerns Salzburg. Salzburg is in the northwest of Styria and in the north of Carinthia, in the neighborhood. The Archdiocese of Salzburg was not only a religious institution, but also an independent ecclesiastical principality within the Holy Roman Empire until 1805. It became a part of the Habsburg Empire only 1816. The Archbishop of Salzburg has the honorary title of Primus Germaniae, making him one of the oldest Catholic authorities from the early Middle Ages. Although there were also estates in Salzburg, as in Styria and Thuringia, the ruler of the country was until the beginning of the 19th century not one of the Habsburg family, but the Archbishop himself. He always came from noble families, which, however, were mostly not based on the country itself. And now you can see, based on this long tradition of existing an independent ecclesiastical state, the archives were the first step in the 1820s to reorganize after the French and the Bavarian occupation. And the museum, the initiative to create a museum started with a museum of the town, because Salzburg is a town, the capital city of the country, and Salzburg is country itself too. And moved step by step to a regional museum, by the way, I would say. And the association behind this management started only in the 1860s, so sometime after the revolution in the middle of the century. And the yearbook was one of the followers of this initiative. Now the fourth example is Upper Austria. Upper Austria is in the northeast of Salzburg and in the north of Styria. You can see this here. Upper Austria existed like Lower Austria in the neighborhood in the east since the 11th century and was ruled until the mid-13th century by the Babenberg dynasty originating from Bavaria. Both regions were the core of what later became Austria. From this Upper and Lower Austria started the creation of a bigger empire at the end then. Yes, and both regions were inhabited solely by a German-speaking population as well as Salzburg. For the longest time, the center of Lower Austria was the city of Vienna, which gradually rose to become the residence of the emperors of the Holy Roman Empire. This led to a special relationship between the city and the countryside, which will be left out at this point. But it is necessary to note that 1365 was founded the University of Vienna. Upper Austria, like Styria, Thuringia, and Salzburg, were rural regions with some mining, salt, iron, and precious metals. The location along the Danube was crucial to its profile. In this way, Upper Austria served as a bridge between Germany, concretely Bavaria, and Vienna. In this case, the Association for Regional Culture, History, etc. was founded in the 30s, so it was the first step, combined with a museum in this province. And the archives and the yearbook were some phenomena later, quite later. So you can see that in all these cases the situation is has another background. Now the protagonists. The protagonists of cultural mediation were for the archives, for the associations, etc. were on the one hand some groups of people divided by different groundings, certainly, who were concerned with education, but there were also in some cases individuals who were particularly proactive. The groups were composed of the following categories. People who worked in the regional administration, people who acted as enlightened sponsors, people who were interested or involved in the collection, processing and dissemination of cultural knowledge, including gymnasiums, in favor of a larger public. Typical of this era is that these staffs were not only from noble or urban bourgeois circles, but also were children from villages, who were able to advance socially through education and urban career. Yes, I forgot to note here, you can see some of the cover examples, Provincia on the left side and the Mitteilungen der Gesellschaft der Salzburger Landeskunde. It's more or less Salzburg's area studies from the second half of the 19th century. Here the protagonist. The individual protagonist, the most famous example of individuals was the brother of Emperor Francis I, Archduke John. Although without any official function, his numerous sustainable initiatives in Syria have made him very popular to this day, to the present. He married a rural wife and had a lot of contact to all strata of the population. Now, what about the cultural topics? It was interested for these journals, magazines, yearbooks, whatever. The geography, because based on the topographic situation till the first half of the 19th century, at least the everyday life between the mountainous areas and the lowland areas were more or less separated. And only with the Enlightenment, with the common French occupation and all these experiences, so the different provinces seem to be an entity and not only a part of different countrysides. So the combination of urban and rural areas and lowlands and mountains was one of the interests to understand and also to mediate to inhabitants. So it was also an ambition to combine local and regional history. So implementing local history as a part of rural history, regional history concerning these provinces. The archaeology, like here in Lesotho too, the folk culture, customs, poetry, songs and dances, but not dominantly literature. There were other organs and other initiatives and other organizations, so it was not the job of this initiative. Religious traditions and sometimes famous subjects from the provinces as patriotic side. Now the institutional effects in the whole. In each of the 4 case studies, institutionalization proceeded differently, depending on the protagonist, the regional conditions, and the underlying motive. The initiative for the collection, organization, and communication of culture to the larger public in the 4 case studies are based on a centuries-old federal tradition and became only, by the way, during several decades more or less scientific character. They are to be understood as reactions to similar measures that came from above. It is from the central government in Vienna. These central institutions included the court library, the state archives, various court museums, and the court offices. For instance, the Ministry of Culture and Education. The material effects. The material effects consisted in following respects. A collecting of artifacts, writings, prints, pictures, clothing, tools, jewelry, etc. The thorough cataloging and preservation and the communication to the contemporary audience, whether through reports, yearbooks, regionals, journals, and exhibitions. Although mountainous terrain dominated in the aforementioned provinces, the culture of the Alpine region was now perceived more strongly than before, because interested and educated people lived in the lowlands. The mountainous area was another world, and so it was changing in the course of the decade. And the mental effects. The mental effects concern 4 points. Local patriotic consciousness was thereby strengthened. The urban middle class felt confirmed in its role in cultural ruling management. The understanding of the heritage of the past was based not only on intellectual insights, but also on immediate local connections, so some feeling for the own earth and the cultural heritage. And the rural society, as part of the public, gradually became aware that it belonged to the regional cultural community. So it was not more, beginning with the second half of the 19th century, a culture of the nobles, a culture of the church, a culture of the bourgeois, and the rest. So it was now a common culture of the region. Now the conclusions. The mediation of culture in that period and in those case studies served too. The identity building between the educated and interested people from the upper, middle and lower classes. The connection between historical artifacts and their contemporary interpretation, and the counterbalance with the cultural offerings that came from the Central Park, from Vienna. A focus on national relevance does not play any role till the end of the 19th century in this direction, in this source, I would say so. Initiatives for the mediation of culture in favor of the Slovenian-speaking population in Styria and Carinthia came mainly from Caneva, the core area of the Slovenian nation. This will be the job of the next speaker to explain it. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Bogdan, for this overview about the founding institutions within the German-speaking area, an example of Austrian Empire, and we saw 4 illustrative case studies. Now I would like to open discussion. If you would like to discuss all three.
We have the coffee break.
Yeah, but you can use
Okay. You explained that we discussed about all presentations, therefore... Okay.
No, I just said that we will have discussion after the first part, then we will have coffee break, and then the second part. If you would like to add something, or if you have comments, if you would like to discuss anything, the floor is yours.
Can we find the letterpiece Matica srpska also online? Is it digitized or?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It is digital. There is a digital archive also for older issues from the 19th century, and separate is this edition file. It's not srpska.
05 on page, home page of Matica srpska, and the previous
It's in the university library. In the library.
The library of Matica srpska.
Yeah, please.
So thank you very much to all of you, and I would like to add that comment as somebody who is privileged to work here and to write for letterpiece from time to time. I would like to emphasize its character in openness towards the free thought, because we are not required every time to give footnotes for every thought we have. You know, I have an impression that contemporary research journals require you to reference everything you say, as if you cannot say something new or have your own mind, you know. And when you receive comments, sometimes it's required that you give some explanation as a proof. Where did this thought came from? Well, it maybe came from my mind. Maybe I can write it freely, as I can in letterpiece of Matica srpska. So you can, submit the works which have footnotes, and you can also submit the essays which are purely speculative, and I perceive it as an island of free thought and creativity in this age of pantophrenia, about which our institutions is also leading a project. You know, all this chasing for points in contemporary academia. So I just needed to emphasize this side of letterpiece.
I think that this is something that is deeply rooted in the very beginnings of the letterpiece, because essayistic form as a genre is very open for discussion and for different kind of resemblance of and also rumination of different kind of topics. So Professor, may I have a question?
Yes, I have a question to letterpiece specialist. Who were the readers in the first generations and the owners of one of the issues?
Who were the readers, so the reception, and the owners of the first issue, who bought the magazine?
Yeah. First, before Matica srpska was formed, there was in Novi Sad an editor that was Konstantin Kaulicija. He was just he has a job of he was a merchant, but he was selling also the books, and he was ready to take care about the magazine, about the German letterpiece. But Professor Magrasic was not satisfied with that help. So that's the reason, because he told to his friend named Pest and Buddha about the problems, because after 1 year it shows that it's really impossible to continue further. Yeah. It's necessary to give money, to earn the money for printing the magazine. It's necessary to collect texts, to have contacts with authors. Then it's necessary to give to somebody who will care all texts to Buddha, because there was a printing house. So it's a lot of different jobs, and professor in gymnasium was not able to do that. And so merchants in Pest found the formula for Matica srpska. They say, listen, we will organize 7 of us in the first circle of founders of institution. Everybody will give money, 100 forints, and with that money we will publish srpska letopis, and all books concerning the problems of the Serbian literature, Serbian culture in general, and Slavic group, and whole general view on Europe, especially in Habsburgian Empire. So that was the idea of learned society, as Dragana explained. But who was that who gave the money to buy? There are people who give money before printing, but the most effect was in a time when it was Siam Ferry. Not book fair, but just fair. Yeah. And people in that place in Pest, there was a majority of the people who buy at that event. There was no bookstores in general, so that was really terrible things. Without institution, it was impossible to save the literary magazine.
Probably also the clergymen read the papers, gave any ideas and so, not only the merchants and the handcrafts.
Yes.
Yeah,
There was a circle of 7 founders of Matica srpska. In the same year, there was another circle of 7 people, and among them there was Miloš Obrenović, who was the leading figure in autonomous Serbia. Yeah. And he gave not 100 forints, but 500. And he was the first one who was not only founder, but a man who donated. Yeah, sponsor. And he paid for his brother also. So that was the principle of organization of Matica. Just to bring all the people who are ready to give the money for institution and who are ready to work. And I think that that type of energy is still the energy who cares about Matica srpska right now. You know, I want to work. Okay, just collect all of us. You know, as Vesta said, like Letopis Matica srpska is. You know.
With the time, in this case studies is more or less the regional government in its budget which pays that. But in the first decade it was the same way. So it's private initiatives made the base for the association foundation or for printing, paying the books, etc. Only the archives were more or less an official step and the museums too.
Yeah.
But it was more or less the same society interested to manage all that. So we cannot, in this case, we cannot separate the idea, the publications, the organization, and the archives, and the museums as well, more or less the same circles who wanted to manage all that.
And another step is very important. It means that it's really necessary in such institution like Matica srpska and like Letopis Matica srpska. It's really necessary to think and organize the type of standard, which is not just law, you know. And that was formal for Matica srpska. So we are something like a second academy. Can I say? We are one society, but
Learn society, but that was
with high level.
Nevertheless, the Corinthians started 1811.
Yeah,
it is still today.
Yeah. And
some interruptions by the wars and so on, but more or less.
I have one question about this, but about the question of the managing this kind of institution in general. Professor Stanic mentioned the fair, and that was the main reason why the journal at the very beginning was a quarterly journal, because the fair was in Budapest 4 times per year, and that was the reason why they organized periodical activity in this kind of rhythm. And another thing, the matter of editing and publishing this journal, I would dare to say, in kind of illiterate surroundings, because very few people were able to read and were literate back then. So we can find that the readers, not just the founders of the institution and the magazine, but also the readership. The readership was contained of members of, usually not just members of the clergy. We have, after each issue, we have the list of prenumeranti. There were people who actually bought the magazines in advance, and in a way the journal was supported with this kind of amount of money. Among them, we are able to find members of the clergy, also like teachers, from schools and professors, doctors, officers, members of the army, and merchants. So we have kind of five aspects of our society that is a kind of very well documented through this kind of list. But I would like to ask you a question about Corinthia. I have 2 questions for your paper. You mentioned this as a very first journal. I didn't find it by my read. I didn't put an accent on this magazine because it wasn't based on literature. Because my criterion by researching was actually Letopis Matica srpska is a literary journal in the very first place. Is Corinthia also dealing with the literary you listed very nicely in your presentation this how it was structured. So the archive, the journal, the institution, and the museum. We also had a gallery and a museum, but not at the very beginning, but in the, I would say, since after the revolutionary year, after the Great Revolution. So it was more or less the structure of Matica srpska, having journal and institution and a gallery, but we didn't mention it.
For the long period, that was just one institution.
Yeah.
But after the Second War, we organized a library and a gallery as a kind of daughters of
yes, but
mother.
for your example, it's an initiative of a group of a population in Hungary. And in these cases, the structure of the country, of a long time existing of identity, of organization, etc. So before the Habsburgs came and made a centralization process. So this was in the heads, and so it was one very important in the course of the 19th century, because we must know in the background the phenomena of the industrialization, of the urbanization, of the nationalization, of the professionalization were existing. And so it was a reaction of the small region of the more or less half self-organizing region to answer, to do something for their own people, not for the Enlightenment intention.
Yeah. So in administration in the Okrugli Empire, that was Roman language, Latin language.
Not
In the past, you know.
in the villages, but in the 16th century it was always German.
Yeah, then German, of course, yeah.
Only the state later in French.
So for the nations with not so many good status in a Okruglian empire, it was very important to organize libraries. For service, it's very important.
Yes.
Libraries, čitališta.
Yes.
Then national theater. National theater, but it's the same thing in Slovenia and in Romania, in the Habsburg Empire. Because it's necessary just to listen and to enjoy your mother tongue, you know.
It was a job of the nobles in the late 18th century to do that. And the answer of the bourgeois in the first half of the 19th century continued this ambition.
Yes, yes. And Matica was organizer for example, for the first professional theater in the South Slavic area that was here in Novi Sad, Srpsko narodno pozorište.
Yes, and for the theater, etc., the interest of the late 18th century was to bring in the culture of Italy and France. And only at the end of, in the background of the French Revolution, etc., then the national German, like Schiller, Goethe, etc., were favorized. So it was a scene change in this period.
But what is it? Are there something very specific, what do you think? Very specific for the idea of German literature, for example, in Habsburg Empire?
Yes.
Are there differences than, for example, in area that in Persia or in other?
The German language was for most of the people in the monarchy normal as mother tongue, but also in the administration language, so in everyday life. So it depended on the perceiver, nobles, some of the clergy, because the libraries of the monasteries were very rich. They can be visited, a large horizon of scientific and literature, etc.
Catholic,
Catholic, yes. Yes, more or less there were and then the universities and the scholar academies and groups and so were interested to disseminate the literature discussion and the products from edition houses from Germany. So non-enlightened world. And only in the course of the enlargement of the schools in the first part of the 19th century, the situation was changing. And also for Styria especially was a new situation, because between the 1770s and 1820s, the university had not the status of university, but only a lyceum. And afterwards they started again, and this is also the reason that the name of these universities, Karl, Franz and Charles, was a founder in the 16th century, and France, Emperor Franz, was a renewer in the 19th century. And so the connection, the renewance of the university created a rivalry till today, because the regional organization, like the archives, the museums, etc., are not the same than the university people. And so it's the two directions, more or less in a parallel sense. Certainly sometimes these are the same people, but there are some distances. So sometimes also conflict, intellectual conflict. But because the university is something statal, and the other institutions are regional, and this regional tradition is so deep, so implemented in the heads, so that this situation, you know, still a several state.
But idea of the greatest values of German literature,
Yes.
in that period, for example, in the 19th century,
Yes.
is that almost the same
Yes.
in Austria
Yes.
and in
Yes.
Germany. And
Yes.
yeah, that's good.
Only
I like it.
only the dialect situation is another, because the German, the dialects in Germany and the dialects in Austria are quite different.
Yes, yes.
Any further comments or questions? No? Okay, then thank you very much for your presentations. And now I would like to close the first section, and we will have a short coffee break. After that, we will continue with two presentations. So let's say half an hour. So we will start at 5:30.